You're listening to the Be Better Off Show by Kelly+Partners.
Well, good morning to the Be Better Off Show, where we get interesting Australian business people to share with us their stories and help us be healthier, wealthier, and wiser. And this morning we've got Daniel Flynn, who's the co-founder and managing director of a company called Thankyou. Good morning, Daniel.
Good morning, Brett. Thank you for having me.
Well, we should always start at the beginning because the beginning's a good place to start. And in your case, I have to ask, Thankyou, what does the company do and where did the name come from?
Thankyou exists all for the end of extreme poverty. We've set up a social enterprise. Our business is owned 100% by our charitable trust. And that's really unique. The whole idea behind Thankyou is that your purchase combined with everyone else's purchase of Thankyou products can make a bigger impact. And we are really laser focused on funding initiatives that will help see the end of extreme poverty. The name, where did it come from? We think gratitude is, it's one of the most powerful things in the world, and we love it. And so to have a brand built around gratitude, thankfulness, and saying thank you, we love the idea of it. When we started, I just had this picture in my mind once of this word thank you, full stop. And I was like, could you call a brand or product Thankyou? I don't know. But people call their products Apple and some other generic words, and it kind of works. So we lent into it, but yeah, people love it and we do too.
Great. And when did you start the business?
So we started in 2008 and in Melbourne, Australia, we kicked off with our first product, which was water that funded water projects. We thought it was a really cool and controversial first product because bottled water, we always said it was a silly product, shouldn't exist, but consumers spent $50 billion on it annually. In 2008, today it's $140 billion. And we just had the idea of, imagine if the water that we buy could help bring water to people who need it. And 4,500 children die every day because of waterborne disease, which is just so wrong. And that was our kind of genesis product. And it's now grown into over 50 products. Hand wash perfectly placed behind me if anyone gets to see anything. But if you can only hear my voice, it's snuck in the background there. But yeah.
So the biggest selling product today?
Yeah, I'd say hand wash. The Thankyou hand wash has had the number one position in the supermarkets for about 5 years running. It's dipped down a little bit now and sort of goes up and down, but it is, we sell a lot of hand wash, sanitizer, body wash, and super grateful to anyone and everyone who's been part of this.
Which is great. So explain, if you would please, if the business is owned by a charitable trust, how does that work and how did you come up with the idea?
Yeah, we set out really on a mission first, and the business became kind of second or the sort of the backing behind the mission. And the mission was, we live in one world with two extremes. We see extreme poverty, which is 736 million people who live in it. And we see extreme consumerism. And this blows my mind, but we spend $63 trillion as consumers every year. That's a lot of dollars. And we saw Thankyou as a bridge between those two extremes. And we felt early on that for Thankyou to be what we saw it to be, it needed to exist not part for, but all for its mission. And so for us, that meant that, all the profits, all the ownership would be for the mission. And so it kind of made sense to start a business. Business exists to kind of benefit the shareholders. We thought, great, our shareholders, the Thankyou Charitable Trust, it can own it 100%, and we'll work really hard to bring as much benefit to that as possible. It creates a super simple message for consumers. We can claim we exist all for our purpose. The challenge does come in when you think of scaling business. We've had to tackle those problems other ways.
And so today, when the business makes a profit or that's owned by the charitable trust, what does it specifically support?
So extreme poverty is complex. It is the term given to people living on less than $1.90 a day globally. And so before the pandemic, there were 736 million people in that group, and that is now growing, unfortunately, for the first time in decades. To solve it, it's not as simple as, well, people need water, so let's get some wells. People need food, let's drop some food off. And a lot of the approaches over the years have looked like that. But I think everyone listening now in 2021 understands that, when you have big problems, there are systemic issues and they're complicated. And so we fund partners, 18 currently, but across so many different facets. And some look at mental health, just to start there. I mean, if you're not mentally resilient, in fact, these guys are the first organization in Africa fully focused on this. And they're focused on helping the 66 million women they estimate struggling with mental health. And, that like mental resilience to help lift your family out of poverty, that's part of the story. We have other organizations that work in microfinance and enterprise. And so they're helping farmers make more money. They're helping people start businesses. We fund some groups who, like Deep Rise, who back local change makers who are starting social businesses or charities locally. We fund some really innovative partners in the water space and agriculture and health. And so really we fund a lot of everything. But what we look for, the common thread, is we are looking for partners who are pioneers, who are thinking about how do we create true impact and not just do lots of activity. They're thinking about the root cause and what is the systems change needed and how do we change that versus what's a quick outcome that might make a donor happy and sound good. And so a lot of the work we fund is actually quite expensive. We fund research. Research is not super popular in the funding world because you're sort of giving money to a piece of paper. But as we would know in areas like business and medicine, research is what advances.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we have sort of a philanthropic sector that is a little bit in the dark ages in comparison to maybe medicine or business. And it's in part because of what's been funded and what was really hard to get funding for.
Yeah, it is very interesting because a lot of the psychology breakthroughs are coming from business research, where there's huge funding in the business space, and so projects that can't get funded in a social sciences sense are being funded through a business lens, which is very, very interesting. So what is the level of funding now that the business contributes every year?
Yeah, it's growing and it goes up and down depending on lots of factors. But for context, so we in 12 years raised $7 million for our partners. But, it was probably year 5, we'd raised about $500,000. So, the organization's really started to pick up momentum and scale. Last year was a big year for us. We were able to give, on top of that $7 million, a further $10 million to our impact partners. And that's off the back of huge increase of sales in sanitizer and hand wash, during 2020, 2021. So, yeah, I mean, the more product we sell, the more people that kind of make the switch, the more impact we can make. It's a simple model. Some days I think it's super hard to run, and that's in part because we operate in a very competitive consumer environment. And so sometimes people choose Thankyou. Maybe sometimes they'll grab another product that's on special. And so, our funding literally follows that very closely.
The choices. So what's the long-term vision? Is it your view that the model has been tested in other businesses where it's proved to be successful, or, as you say, in your sort of FMCG space up against really well-capitalized businesses, do you have enough flexibility to structure the business in a way to be long-term competitive?
Look, I think innovation and, that kind of infinite mindset Simon Sinek talks about has us set for long-term sustainability. I think it's hard. I think it's challenging. The model is challenging, has challenges with it. We believe in it. So we'll keep, and we think the shoe fits for Thankyou. If I was sitting down with someone starting up, I would not say, here, you should definitely wear these shoes. You could, but you'd need to be very comfortable, go in eyes wide open, and I think find the shoe that fits for you. It does fit for us, and we are up against some pretty big organizations. They do have access to capital, and some days I kind of wish we were them, but then other days I think they wish they were us. Maybe that's something that we've been thinking deeply about in many ways. There's a great quote that says, it's not the big that eat the small, it's the fast that eat the slow. And I think that for a lot of our journey, we have envied big and at the same time maybe underestimated just the speed and the agility Thankyou's had.
Yeah.
Last year was a great example. We won a whole bunch of huge tenders, government work with sanitizers, retailer work, and we won it, which blows my mind, on price. Now, I mean, I'm very proud of Thankyou, but I sort of think we're kind of little compared to every other group out there. One particular category manager, he said, "Hey, thank you so much, guys. Like, you're not price gouging. Other people are offering me the same essential product, but for triple the price right now."
So where are you manufacturing, Daniel?
So the majority of our manufacturing is here in Australia. Last year, Australian supply chain literally fell apart, certainly for us, in a big way. So we had to lean on some, overseas suppliers to help, which was mission critical. And I think our overall view is I personally love Made in Australia, the concept, but I also acknowledge we're a global market and a globally competitive market. And so I think we're open to manufacturing kind of anywhere. And so we've had some work in China, with some manufacturing of a great product actually out of New York, Long Island. I couldn't believe it, but very good product, very, very competitive on price. And we really look for innovation, strong quality product, and something that's going to stand out in the market.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so in COVID, as you've raised, I've been having this challenge with myself over the last 6 months to see if I can do interviews without mentioning COVID until the end, if at all. But in your business, it has had this real impact. What have you seen as not so much the business impact, but do you see any sort of long-term lessons for the business and your people that have sort of come to the fore through that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think businesses go through cycles. I think we went from startup to much more established, and we kind of got to that point with all the systems, all the processes, all the people, all the departments, and probably for the business we were, it's about the shoe that fits for you. I think we became too slow and we became too structured, and so COVID has shown us the importance of agility, the importance of speed, the importance of risk taking. And you have to take significant risk if you want to see significant return and opportunity. And I think a lot of people want the return without the risk. They want the stability, which I think is an ultimate illusion. And that's what we all discovered last year, is that, the bubble of stability, it can pop at any moment. And, last year was one thing, but there have been many more challenges. I mean, even right now, global supply chain has not settled down. It's become increasingly more complex. Shipping prices tripled, quadrupled. I mean, that is just, no one built their models for that. There's a pallet shortage globally right now. That's sort of the latest, twist of, and there's many. And so you can make your product, great job. You can have a customer who wants to buy it, but if you can't get that little piece of wood that transports it, what happened?
Big problem.
Yeah, huge problem. And so, I think, we've gone back to our roots of maybe at times the scrappy startup I don't think we're scrappy, but I think that culture of MVP, what is that sort of minimum viable product? How do we iterate? How do we get an idea out and improve later versus make the perfect idea, and then push it out? I think that matters. I think teams have to be really mentally trained and ready to expect change. I think one of the core competencies in sort of the future of business, and it really draws on the past, but it's found in that grit and that stickability, and also the ability to accept change quickly and see it positively and look for the positives in it. Now, I think we're all fatigued of change, and I think we're all, generally speaking, I feel like we've stuck at it long enough. But my gut feel is that the world is complicated and complex, and I think we've probably got a next pretty big decade ahead and beyond. And so how do we approach that? Do we approach it as victims and wishing the past, or do we think, like often, that optimistic startup thinks anything's possible? We'll find a way. Let's do it together.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting challenge. Is there more change than there has been in the past? In some respects, I think there is, and a lot of businesses and individuals are being affected and not necessarily certain how to respond. But I do think that in our lives at different times we feel more capable of responding to it than at other times. So when you're young and you have no kids and you have no responsibilities and you haven't really got moving in life, if you like.
Yeah.
I think you see often an easier path to deal with dramatic change. Mm. Whereas I think you see, in the workforce, we see, virtually the last taboo is ageism, in that very few, even very modern corporations that talk about things like diversity have no quota or standards around employing people over 50, or people with disabilities, or people that don't come from the same background or social situations as themselves. Yeah, it is interesting, I think. I don't know that it's getting more simple. It does seem to be becoming more complex.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think, one of the concepts in leadership and in business is around creating margin. Businesses spend a lot of time putting a lot of work into creating that financial margin to kind of make the world go round. But as leaders and individuals and workforces and family members, I don't think we've been as relentless in, improving our margin. And so when the world hits or there's a crisis, and it could be family, local, global, there's no margin. And so we break or we're broken. And, I think, and there is a hugely unhealthy culture in business, of which Thankyou's been guilty, as charged in kind of just pushing and working too much. And, and it means that people don't have the margin they need to process change.
Yeah.
And to look, okay, how are we going to turn this around? And we got no margin. You just get into that defense mode. You shut down and lock down. So I kind of hope that we can, as a culture, certainly as a team at Thankyou, but I hope organizations can kind of wake up to how do we build more margin in for people. Because
it's interesting because it's society-wide, Governments didn't have enough ICU beds because funding ICU beds for a crisis doesn't seem like it's important unless there's a crisis. Yeah. Most people don't have a week's savings set aside. There is no sort of supply chain resilience in major businesses that has become pretty clear because there's an assumption everything will just continue as it is. So risk management, as much as it's talked about, hasn't really been thought about. And then I think you're right. Like one of the things that's really struck me is that as people have sought to work from home, a lot of people haven't put themselves in accommodation that allows them to work from home. And so, or they have family situations that depend on two people working 80 hours a week, but you've got two kids and you've got to educate them. And what happens if you have to educate them at home? And if maybe there's only a small chance of that, but there's no, as you say, sort of margin of safety, if you like, as my friend Mr. Buffett would say. But it's a good one to think about, because I think well-run businesses and people and families are always thinking about sort of downside protection.
Yeah. And it is, I find it hard personally I've probably got an optimism bias, So I'll sort of, say for a rainy day, it's raining right now where I am, but it's like, we'll figure it out on the rainy day. That's not a great approach. You look at some pretty successful businesses. I'm not sure what the latest stockpile of cash is at Apple, but it was at one point, did you hear like 400 billion? Am I right?
Oh, yeah, way more, nearly $1 trillion, 800.
Okay, cool. Great. Sorry. Yeah, that's how up to date I am on that one, right? But that is a very different, when you operate under that idea versus say $1 trillion of debt or just debt in general or no surplus or no reserves, I think it's just, it changes how you think and innovate, create. And I don't know. I think we've got to think more about that. And I'll tell you, that's very hard. Actually, just as I say that out loud, super hard for an organization like Thankyou, because we're in the business of giving. And so people buy into this so that we give, and that's exactly what we do. But what about the reserves? What about when everything's disrupted and you could lose the business overnight? These are things we wrestle with. But the societal expectation would be like, you shouldn't be probably having too many reserves. Certainly not if it came out that Thankyou had $1 trillion cash in reserve, I think we'd all be pretty ticked off.
Yeah, but I think in the context of a business, I think reserves are prudent, and I think they can be explained to engaged stakeholders. And it's what our politicians do, and I think leaders do as well, is they assume people won't understand rather than making the effort to have a conversation and explain. And so it gets people sort of communicating in shorthand and talking down to people ultimately. But if you grabbed your stakeholders and said, hey, we've been through this situation, we think we should have enough cash set aside that we can operate the business for 12 months in a calamity or a catastrophe. What do you guys think? I think any board of a charity or company would say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Why don't we refill, the strategic reserves, if you like? But it's, again, it's a conversation that takes forethought, takes a lot of effort to communicate well, and to engage people. But, I think it's one of those big lessons that come from COVID, this idea of what's the resilience of your people, yourself, your supply chain, the business. Because one of the things, I've always wanted to have a people team, not a human resources department, because I don't think humans are resources to be consumed by a business. But, always at the top of my mind is, how do we build in enough opportunity to allow our people to recharge and stay fresh? And yes, people should work hard. Life's like a gym, if you go there and do nothing, you end up weak and soft. You also need to make sure that people, feel like they have the capacity to learn and grow and get the recharge that comes from that. So it is, I think COVID's been a good time of reflection for people. People have had a bit more time, even though they've been busy. They're not so much tearing around in travel and other old patterns of behavior that hadn't been examined, I think, for a long time.
Yeah.
And technology's probably made a difference. But to your point, on your 736 million people that are in extreme poverty, and as you said, for the first time in more than a decade, that number is growing. I see no great structural effort to reduce consumerism generally. And you see the impact of technology and education really delivering returns at exponential rates to those people that are engaged and can use technology and are educated. What's your sense of, what that does to extreme poverty? And my sense is that there's not a huge amount of awareness, let alone much care factor for the issue generally.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty spot on. I think if you sat every person down and everyone listening, if we all took a moment to think about And for me, at the very beginning, I was 19. We got kids now, Justin and I. We didn't, have kids in when we started. We were dating. We were co-founders. It was an adventure. Jared, we'd known each other from school. We were best mates. But we were so moved because we stopped and really thought about it. And for me, it was this idea of, wow, imagine if I lost my sisters to waterborne disease because the water I got them killed them. That happens to 4,500 kids a day. At the time, 900 million people didn't have access to clean water. And I think if we all stopped for a moment and thought, right, imagine I'm holding my own child, my friend's child, they're dying or dead because the water, like it just, and considering
like it's obscene, right? Like
it is.
So what does that say about our priorities, right? Like we're reading daily. I think the US this week appointed their first transgender general, and that might be some sort of progress for, someone somewhere. But these issues that are large to small groups of people, and not to invalidate them, but when you've got 736 million people in extreme poverty and you've got 4,500 kids a day dying from waterborne disease, I personally struggle to see some issues that get an enormous amount of airtime in our overprivileged societies as being quite as critical as issues that are obviously critical but seem to be largely ignored.
Yeah, and I mean we've locked onto this for 13 years now, and my personal perspective is deep down everyone would care, particularly if you took the time, but I think
not very deep down.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. Not very deep, just a little bit deeper.
I reckon if I had 10 people having a beer and you made that statement, you'd have 10 people agree within less than 10 seconds that is an outrage. Yeah. And their simple question would be, what can I do that is easy?
Yeah.
That could solve the problem. And sanitation of water, we've mastered for some time. The technology has made huge leaps. There are people around the world working on it. I know the Gates Foundation are doing a lot in that space as well. Yeah. But it does feel to me like some of these enormous issues, people would be prepared to do a lot at a systemic level if there was leadership that was interested.
Yeah, and it's I think about those 10 people that you're sitting and having a beer with. The statistics aren't great. Once people, and people have been doing ads about poverty forever, but I think in Australia they reckon there is, of the 24 million, about 1 million people that donate, or it might be just under, to issues around poverty. There are many things people donate to, but so that is.
But it's very unseen in Australia, right? Like we don't have a whole bunch of people dying from unsanitized water.
Yeah, correct.
It feels like an issue that's a long way away. But I must say, like you see with COVID and all the rest of it, if the government turned around tomorrow and said, because there's always the argument about offshore, support of offshore development generally and donations, but hey, we're going to put your taxes up by $100 a person, and it's going to go with no friction directly to building dams or building clean water and we'll do one country at a time. I feel like it'd be more like a national rallying point than some sort of giant scandal. If you could say that in this small country, sanitation's terrible and X number of kids are dying a day, and as Australians, we're just going to fix one country at a time. I can't imagine anyone being too upset about it.
Well, it's a fascinating topic. Interestingly, humans are a bit more complicated because as a group, we are all very self-focused and tribal. So I think in Australia, the government has in fact dropped the contribution to international aid. I think makes sense because, most people that go to work every day don't appreciate sort of the wokester greenism of the people that promote that particular giving to their friends in organizations that waste money. But those same people that might oppose that, I can't imagine opposing, friction-free support of
an actual developing outcome, right? It's the NGO sort of sector has become so big and full of so many hangers-on and appears to be so inefficient generally that I think it's easy for people to say, why are we giving money to the UN, for example, right? Which does look like, a bunch of people sitting around talking to each other. But when you see a village where there's something that needs to be done, and there are charities that are quite successful by being so focused on genuine deliverables.
Yeah. Look, I like your optimism.
I'm not cynical about people, right?
No. Look,
I think people want to help, but they hate politicians.
Yeah. Look, our job at Thankyou, and this is where we've resolved. Our job at Thankyou is that conversation with the 10 people having beer. I'd like to be able to tell them, hey, there's an issue. By the way, that beer you all drank tonight was Thankyou. And I'm not saying we're getting into beer, but the concept is...
No, but just buy some hand wash.
You've already made a difference. And if you want to make more of a difference, join us. Yeah,
it's very cool. So what's your 10-year plan, your 20-year plan? Like for you, and you mentioned your wife, Justine.
Yeah.
Like how old are your kids now?
So Jed is 6 and Jordan, our daughter, is 9 months old. So
okay.
Really?
So like the 10-year plan, the 20-year plan.
Yeah.
Is it stay nimble, keep innovating?
Yeah. I mean, I can give it to you loosely, Yeah. The mission from day one was, this is a story of I suppose a couple of people and a product that grew to more products and more people that we see growing to more countries, and then more products and then more people. And the model is that. So you will see Thankyou popping up in more and more categories. We have a history in water, personal care, food, baby, like nappies and diapers. You'll see Thankyou popping up in more categories once we get the product right and we're happy with it and we're convinced that it is in itself a market leader without the cause. You add that in, it's a game changer. And then you'll see Thankyou pop up in more countries. And so just even in that sentence, there's a lot of work to be done because there's a lot of countries that Thankyou is not yet in, and there is a lot of categories that you're yet to find us in.
So do you use public capital markets like the Sown Hearts and Minds conference? They've got $1 billion listed investment vehicle. 100% of the profits go to, particular charities. Like I could see that you could really structure to allow people to invest, who want to support what you're doing, but really magnify what you're able to do. Yeah,
I mean, we have some thinking around it. We've had some really great people back this. There is different ways that people can support. I think the traditional investment isn't quite on the table, the equity piece, but outside of that, we're always looking for creative ways to grow and scale.
Why is that? Do you think that people wouldn't invest for something other than a financial return?
I think philanthropists and social investors who are actually social investors, not investors looking for the new term to sort of, it sounds super cool. So that group wouldn't be interested, and we wouldn't be interested in them. But people that are genuinely like, hey, we've got some money, and that invested in the right way without changing the mission, without personally benefiting from that mission, I think it's a match made in heaven for the Thankyou model anyway.
And I think you could get an allocation from those people who aren't purely investing for financial return. I think it's really interesting. Mate, really great to chat. I'm really pleased for our audience to have heard from Daniel today and his company, Thankyou, him and Justine's company, Thankyou. I think what you're doing is really amazing. I think it's a constant challenge to reimagine and rethink ways of doing things, but ultimately things don't change without people, coming up with different ways to do things. And I think the impact that you're having through your product, but also through the way you're structuring and encouraging other people to think more broadly about their businesses is really great, and likely to create even more change than you probably suspect over time.
Well, that's the goal. But yeah, thank you so much, Brett. Great to connect.
Really great. So as I like to say at the end of every interview, have a great day.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Be Better Off Show. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review on Apple Podcasts.
Have a great day.